Whiskers was a charming cat.
He lived with Mrs. Hubbard.
Their cottage was small and cozy. It was filled with the aroma of freshly baked cookies. Whiskers loved to curl up on the rug by the fireplace. He would often dream of chasing mice and birds.
Mrs. Hubbard would pet him gently.
Whiskers loved his life with Mrs. Hubbard. She would tell him stories every night. The stories were about faraway lands and magical creatures. Whiskers would listen with wide, curious eyes. He longed for adventure. He often stared out the window. The world outside seemed big and exciting. One sunny afternoon, Mrs. Hubbard was cleaning the attic.
Whiskers decided to join her.
The attic was dusty and full of old things. Whiskers loved to explore. He sniffed at an old trunk in the corner. It was covered in cobwebs.
Mrs. Hubbard opened the trunk.
Inside, they found a beautiful collar. It was made of leather and had a large, sparkling jewel in the center. The jewel glowed with a warm light. Whiskers had never seen anything like it. Mrs. Hubbard picked up the collar.
She dusted it off gently.
As soon as she did, the jewel began to glow brighter. The room was filled with a warm, golden light. Whiskers felt a strange sensation. It was like something was pulling him. Suddenly, the room spun around. Whiskers closed his eyes.
When he opened them again, he was in a completely different place.
He was no longer in the dusty attic. He stood in the middle of a forest. The trees were tall and green. The air was filled with the sound of birdsong. Whiskers looked around in amazement. He couldn't believe his eyes. The forest was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The flowers were in every color imaginable. The grass sparkled like 1,000 tiny emeralds. He was scared, but also excited. This was the adventure he had been waiting for. He took a deep breath and set off into the forest. He wore the glowing collar. It felt warm against his fur.
He met a wise old owl named Luna. Luna had big, round eyes. She told him about the forest. She said it was called the Enchanted Forest. Luna warned Whiskers about the dangers of the forest. She told him about an evil sorcerer. The evil sorcerer had stolen the Crystal of Purrfection. The Crystal of Purrfection was a magical artifact. It kept balance in the forest. Without it, the forest was dying. Narrator. As Whiskers walked, he met many strange and wonderful creatures.
Whiskers knew he had to help. He promised Luna he would find the Crystal of Purrfection. He continued on his journey.
He met a playful squirrel named Pip. Pip was always collecting nuts.
He also met a shy rabbit named Thistle. Thistle loved to hide in the bushes.
Pip, Thistle, and Luna decided to join Whiskers on his quest. They knew it would be dangerous. They also knew it was important. They were determined to help their new friend. They set off together deeper into the forest. The journey was long and perilous. They had to cross a rushing river. They climbed a steep mountain. They even walked through a dark and scary cave. Each challenge brought them closer together. They learned to rely on each other.
Whiskers was brave and resourceful. Luna used her wisdom to guide them.
Pip's agility helped them overcome obstacles.
Thistle, despite being shy, always cheered them on.
They faced each challenge with courage and determination. One day they came across a clearing in the forest. The clearing was dark and gloomy. The trees were bare. The flowers were wilted. In the center of the clearing stood a tall, dark tower. The tower was made of black stone.
Luna told them it was the sorcerer's lair.
They had finally found the source of the forest's troubles. They knew they had to be cautious. They crept towards the tower, their hearts pounding with anticipation. They found the sorcerer at the top of the tower. The sorcerer was a scary figure. He wore a long black robe. He had a wicked gleam in his eye. He held the Crystal of Purrfection. It looked dull and lifeless.
The sorcerer laughed when he saw them. He thought they were no match for his power. He raised his hands to cast a spell.
But Whiskers was too quick. He jumped forward and bit the sorcerer's hand. The sorcerer dropped the crystal. It fell into Whiskers' paws. As soon as he touched it, the jewel on his collar glowed brightly. The Crystal of Purrfection pulsed with magical energy. The light filled the room. The light was so bright that the sorcerer cried out. He vanished into thin air. With the sorcerer gone, the crystal began to glow with its original brilliance. Color returned to the forest. The trees sprouted new leaves, flowers bloomed again. Whiskers and his friends returned to the forest's edge. They said goodbye to each other. They promised to never forget their adventure. Whiskers took one last look at the enchanted forest. He knew he would always cherish the memories. Suddenly he felt a familiar tug.
He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was back in Mrs. Hubbard's attic. The old trunk was still open, the collar was gone.
Mrs. Hubbard rushed over to him. She had been worried sick. She hugged him tightly. Whiskers purred contentedly. He was happy to be home. Although he was back in his ordinary life, something had changed within him. He had faced his fears. He had made true friends. He had saved an entire forest. He knew that even the smallest of cats could be heroes. He curled up on his rug, his heart full of warmth and the memory of the glowing collar. He knew that no matter what, he would always carry the spirit of adventure within him. The adventure may be over, but the magic would stay with him forever.